Hello, everyone. I'm Charlie, seasoned fundraiser, host, and producer of Fixing the Philanthropic Flow, a series powered by IG Advisors where we bring you the voices of fundraising and grant making activists who inspire us.
Hi everyone, I'm Harriette, an advisor at IG and also a seasoned grant maker myself turned resource activist.
Today, we are speaking with one of our wonderful Fix the Flow fellows, Sabina. Sabina, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your journey?
Well, hi everyone, it's great to be here today. My name's Sabina Basi and I'm the Director of Funding, Communications and Transformative Partnerships at AD International. What that means is that I oversee all of our fundraising, our communications, and also our partnerships, which are needed to resource and make our new strategy happen. So AD International is in the process of becoming a participatory grant maker for disability justice. And what that means is that we want to try to channel more power and resources directly to grassroots disability justice activists in the countries where we work. So the organisation is a really great place for resource activism because really it's at the core of what we're trying to do as an organisation now. So really using our power and our privilege and our proximity to wealth to sort of intentionally move resources to where we know that they need to be to support those who are doing frontline work.
Wow, can't wait to dive into some of those themes and methods in more detail in a second. So our Fix the Flow Fellowship is a movement of what we call resource activists. And I'd love to hear from you, Sabina, about what made you make that shift from just playing the fundraising game to really wanting to change the game and really change the way the system works.
I think it was an increasing sort of malaise with how the international development system was set up and the power asymmetries that I was observing within it. I think when I first joined the international development sector as a sort of young fundraiser, I was so keen to sort of impress and be the very best that I could possibly be at my job and raise lots of money. It had taken so long to try and get a job in the international development sector anyway, which we now know is due to the fact that there's a real lack of diversity within the sector. After a year of trying, I finally landed this job in an organisation as a fundraiser because it was basically the only job that I could get. So it wasn't as though I really planned to do that. I wanted to work more on the programmatic side of things. I spent at least the first 3 years just trying to prove myself and really doing very much that playing into the game, trying to be the best fundraiser that I could possibly be. So I think that all started to shift in around 2015. So in 2015, I moved to Uganda to work there for a couple of years for an INGO as a fundraiser based out of Kampala. And I think it was there that things really started to hit me in terms of the power imbalance and the resource inequality between international organisations and local activists and organisations. So I felt deeply uncomfortable with the fact that quite a lot of INGO staff had very nice lives. You know, there was an expat community that was made up of INGO staff, people working for global organisations that had plenty to live comfortably. Nice cars, kids were going to private school, all that sort of thing. Whereas many of my friends, and also at the time I was working for a youth organisation, I was meeting with lots of local young activists and local youth-led organisations. Many of those groups were just really struggling to get by. And so that sort of stark contrast between the INGO expat community and local activists and local organisations was probably the moment where I started to feel really uncomfortable with raising funds for such a large organisation with not very much of it getting to the youth-led organisations that were really driving change and real work in their communities. And I remember I struck up friendships with a couple of youth-led organisations, and I just remember how hard they had to hustle to try and get a fraction of a large programmatic budget. That was just the way it was. It just felt so odd that we talked a lot about working in partnership with local organisations and also supporting the leadership of young people. But when it came to the money, there seemed to be some sort of wall, there seemed to be some sort of red line. I always sort of wondered why. Why is that? Why can't we just share the resources equally? So it was that experience of living and working in Uganda that really tipped the balance for me. And then I came back, and then there was, COVID and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter and that movement within the development sector around decolonizing and racial justice. That's when all of that just felt like it came to a breaking point for me. I was genuinely thinking about leaving international development. It didn't feel like it was very much in line with my purpose and my values anymore, until I started to understand that there was actually a different way, there was a different approach, there was a movement of people within the sector that were genuinely trying to change things. And I got to know some of those people, and I felt like there was a like-minded community there. So that kept me in the international development sector. But I still, even then, couldn't quite reconcile the fundraising bit with the decolonising bit. So I knew it would be great to be part of an organisation that has an overarching mission around shifting power, decolonising, racial equity. But I was still struggling to understand how that applied to fundraising, how that applied to the money, because that's really where my role was. When I joined AD International, I started to understand the role that I could play in moving money in a more sort of fair and equal way.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I actually didn't know that full story, even though I have actually known you for quite a while. So that was really interesting. Now, I'd love to hear from you as a resource activist now, and having been on this journey. What would you say is your superpower?
I think, like any activist, our superpower is to speak truth to power and be as authentic as we can be. I think speaking truth to power is not something that I'm scared of doing. If you think about that in the context of a fundraising role where you are talking to pretty powerful, wealthy people a lot of the time, that is not something that all fundraisers feel comfortable doing, and that's totally understandable. And I was totally there myself at one point as well, and that's what I refer to as this passive donor pleasing behaviour that we are taught to have. I think that as I've become more confident in myself and my leadership and my approach, I've shifted a bit more towards building authentic relationships with the partners and the funders that we work with. I think that's come through a lot more, just being really honest about what's going on and what we really think, the good things, the bad things, not glossing over the realities of this work because we're trying to compete for funding or we're trying to impress, trying to present the best version. That feels really disingenuous, and people can tell, people can see through that. So it's part of my personality to be authentic as much as possible. I've started to bring that to the work and the interactions with funders, and what that looks like in practice is talking about the challenges in your organisation as well as the things that are going well. Many of the funders that I work with now really appreciate that transparency. In fact, I've had that feedback directly from one of our funders. They said, what we love about ads and working with you is that there's real transparency. So I think that's key.
That's really important to highlight for everyone listening, is that actually being open and transparent, actually on the other side, funders appreciate that, and they're more likely to build a relationship with you in a partnership if you show up in that way.
Absolutely, because I think they're learning through that transparency. You're making people aware and you're opening people's minds to things that they might not have appreciated before, and genuinely they're really grateful for that. And again, I think that's really important in the context of ads work, because we are going through this transformation. So we're changing from thing to another thing. We have, as an organisation, been really open about how hard that is, how exciting it is, and how we feel that it's the right thing to do, but also how hard that is. So it is a natural extension of what ad is about. But I think I would describe that authenticity, that transparency, that honesty as the superpower, because it just means that you open up a level of trust there before.
In the spirit of being transparent, what's your kryptonite? So what's holding you back from the change you want to create?
Do you know what? I think there is still this lingering scarcity mindset, which is probably holding me back from going to the heights that I would want to go to. And that's partly because that's baked into a fundraising profession, isn't it? There's never enough money. We always need more money. There's never enough resources. I think that is quite quite a natural part of our work. I think also because of my personal background, my family background, where I'm from and who I am, I think that's also that sort of anxiety around there never being enough money. The fear and the anxiety that comes with that can lead to bad decisions. And I think that's why being brave enough to just lean into that, or just see it or be aware of it and then try to turn it on its head and make a different decision is so powerful. I say most decisions are made out of fear or love, and just being really aware that if you're making a decision out of fear or anxiety of not having enough money, it may not always be the right decision. So just being really aware of how that creeps into your decision making as a fundraising leader, I think, is something that I'd say to people that are listening is a kryptonite of mine that I still see creeping in.
I think it is such a tension that fundraisers in every cause area struggle with, is this desire to approach fundraising in whatever way it is that you're trying to improve the system. You spoke about speaking truth to power and making fundraising more equitable. However it is you're doing that, there is always that tension of the immediate need for funding and the fear, as you so eloquently described, that comes with this scarcity mindset that is baked into the sector. I think it's really great that you bring that up, because I think it's something that we've all probably struggled with at some point. I wanted to ask you about your decisions that you have spoken about on the fellowship and in your piece that was shared in Alliance to that effect, and making decisions not from a place of fear. You speak about instances in which you have turned down funding in some cases in order to uphold your values. That can be quite a daunting concept for people to think about doing, given this need that we're all balancing. So could you share a little bit more about that and how maybe those decisions have encouraged funders that you have partnerships with to change their approach, if at all?
I'm not sure the extent to which turning down funding has really influenced a change in those donors' practices. For some it has, for others I'm not sure, because I haven't heard from them again. There was a sort of interaction whereby we communicated our decision not to work with them and politely bow out of the partnership at that time. There was a request for feedback around why we'd come to that decision. That opened up a door for a really constructive conversation where we were able to lay out really transparently and really honestly the reasons why we were turning down the partnership at the time. I do feel that that feedback was really heard, and I wonder if it made that particular organisation realise that there's more they might need to bring to a partnership in the future rather than just money and expertise. There's also strategic alignment, values alignment that is equally important to people. And I just hope that after having that really good constructive feedback conversation, it made them think twice about what they bring to a partnership other than the heavy weight of loads of money, because that is the basis for a strong transformative partnership. I think the one that they were proposing was very transactional. I think they thought that that was enough. And I hope I made them realise that that's not always enough.
I'm really glad that you've managed to have a constructive and valuable conversation off the back of that. And it's important for people to hear. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to talk about your ideal vision of the funding system. So on the Fix the Flow Fellowship, we talk about many ways in which the funding system doesn't quite work for us, but we also try to articulate and really outline a collective guiding star for what we want the funding system to look like. So in your ideal utopian vision, what does that funding system look like? What are the top 3 qualities that you would say you envision?
Well, I think a utopian funding system would be fair, it would be transparent, and I would also say it would be reparative. So fair as in making sure that funding was being distributed in a fair way in terms of issues. So AD works on disability justice. There is not enough funding for that to do. It's not really recognised as a human rights issue. Only 3% of human rights funding actually goes to that issue. So fair in terms of the specific issues that the philanthropic system is trying to address, but also fair in terms of the groups that are able to access funding. We all know that the bigger and more articulate and the better writer you are, you're able to access a whole bunch more resources than some local organisations, but they're doing amazing work, right? So both in terms of the issue area and the groups, I just wish it was a bit fairer and there was just less silos in the funding system. So many funders tend to talk about supporting one theme over another theme, or trying to focus on one thing rather than another. But I think I would love to see a funding system that took a more intersectional approach to funding. So seeing social justice as an entire thing that incorporates everything within it and everyone, from climate justice to racial justice to gender justice, all of that coming together as something that needs to be resourced as a whole. Now, I know that might feel unrealistic to some because it's such a big issue and you have to choose which bit of it you can influence change, right? But having a more intersectional approach to funding would be much better for everybody involved, both grant makers and the organisations that they're supporting. So the second thing I said was transparent, and we've sort of covered how important transparency is. But I think also if funding were to be distributed on the basis of great leaders and good ideas, rather than just relationships and who knows who. Now, this is a funny one because I'm a big believer in relationship-based fundraising. I do this all the time in my role, but I also recognise the privilege that I have to be able to put myself physically in front of a funder and speak to them in English in a relatively articulate way and explain the issue that we're trying to address. But that isn't always the case for somebody who's a non-English speaker and can't travel to the spaces where funders tend to congregate. So I think that does still sit a little bit uncomfortably with me. And I know it means that in some situations we've got funding and others haven't. I just wish that in an ideal funding system, there was some way that great ideas, great organisations, great leaders could get access to the resources that they need purely based on merit. The potential that they have to create large-scale change and impact, rather than solely being based on who knows who and those relationships that you have in place. And then reparative, looking at philanthropy from a justice lens, from a historical perspective. Wealth accumulation is not an accident, right? It didn't happen on its own. We all know there's reasons why certain groups and certain countries have more wealth than others. So I think looking at it as a systemic issue and putting it into a historical perspective, not looking at philanthropy as a historical fact that's in the present, but really understanding that the forces of colonialism and capitalism and ableism are all affecting who has money and who doesn't. And I think there is therefore a role that the philanthropic sector can play in sort of redressing some of those historical injustices and creating greater wealth equality. So hopefully that's not too much to ask. Just those three things would be wonderful. Maybe it wouldn't even need to exist anymore.
This sounds great. I'm there with you. So Sabina, what would be your advice to someone listening to this who's wanting to become a resource activist?
I think we'd have to start with really understanding your why. Purpose is everything. Everyone's journey to being a resource activist is going to be different. It's going to be based on the moment where they hit that wall of deep discomfort and feel like I can't carry on doing things this way anymore. I'm really trying to think about whether the work that you're pursuing is in line with your purpose anymore, if it's in line with your values anymore. I think you'll know what that moment feels like. I'm sure you've both had it at some point as well. You just feel like, this is destroying my soul. I cannot do this anymore. So I think that is really so individual. That has got to be the thing that you hold on to as your starting point, and just clutching on to that why and that purpose is really important for the duration of the work that you're going to do. And then I think it's about understanding what's realistically within your control. I think organisation-wide change is really hard, whether you're working for a grant maker or you're a fundraiser, because we work in organisations and systems that are that have got such embedded norms and ways of doing things. And whilst we're striving for that longer term systemic change, there will be little murmurs, little waves of change that you can send rippling through your organisation. So just figure out what that is. It can be small, it can be big, might be small and big at different times, but just trying to appreciate what is within your control and not being too hard on yourself about the things that are outside of your control. That's actually also been a really big learning for me from this fellowship. We did the whole exercise, didn't we, around the spheres of influence. And I think as activists, you've got to always check yourself, because you do want the world to change. But in the process of trying to change the world, you might exhaust yourself, frustrate yourself, and stress yourself out. If you don't look after yourself, then that's not going to be a sustainable fight, right? So just be real about what you can do and what you can't do, and don't be too hard on yourself about the stuff that is out of your control for now. I think that's probably the most important bit of advice. The second thing I would say is find other like-minded people. Before I had my own epiphany and before I started this new values-aligned, more ethical approach to fundraising at AD, there were many other fundraisers that were doing this way before me. I've since been introduced to some amazing resource activists that used to work for feminist funds and have been doing this work for decades before me. And it's so humbling to be able to talk to them and understand their journeys and their challenges and their secrets to success. So find other people. There's quite a few of us out there. I think coming together and learning from each other and building community and a sense of solidarity is going to be so powerful for this work.
There's so much power, as we often hear and say on the fellowship, in finding your people and your community. So I'm so you feel like you have that. And just thank you so much for everything you've shared today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everybody watching. Please do stay tuned for more episodes. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe. Please do share with any fundraisers and grant makers in your life who are in need of a little bit of sparkle in their journey. And you can also apply to join our movement of resource activists by clicking the link in the description below to join the Fix the Flow Fellowship, because together we can fix the flow of resources for good.